Imagine hearing the sound of your own broken voice weeping at a funeral that hasn't happened yet. When a completely ordinary man receives a chilling, static-heavy voicemail detailing his own memorial service, dated for the exact next day, his quiet world is instantly thrown into a terrifying race against time. From the outside, he is still breathing, but a series of bizarre coincidences, a mysterious idling black car, and a looming administrative glitch threaten to erase his entire existence from the world forever. Caught between cold logic and an eerie supernatural timeline ticking down to exactly 11:11 p.m., he and those closest to him must confront long-buried family secrets and painful vulnerabilities before the final second slips away. This emotional, high-stakes mystery will make you question what it truly means to be alive and present for the people who matter most. Before we dive into this gripping journey, we would love to know, which city are you watching from today?
Please drop the name of your city in the comments below so we can all get to know each other much better. Also, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of the upcoming episodes. The rain in Seattle never really felt like water. To Ethan Vance, it felt like a heavy, perpetual hum that blurred the edges of the world. At 24, Ethan was a master of fading into the background, a silent ghost operating behind the massive soundboards of a late-night audio editing studio downtown. As a sound engineer, his entire life was spent adjusting the volumes of other people's voices, fine-tuning their laughter and sharpening their tears, while his own life remained completely muted. Tonight was no different. The studio was dark, illuminated only by the cold, neon blue glow of the monitor screens and the rhythmic jumping of the green audio waves on his digital timeline. Outside, the city moved in a blur of headlights and umbrellas, but inside his head, there was only a profound, hollow emptiness, genuinely happy, or even genuinely sad. He was just existing, moving through a monochrome routine that felt less like living and more like waiting for the credits to roll. His phone sat face down on the mixing console, as quiet and isolated as he was. For months, a quiet conflict had been raging inside him, a desperate yearning to be seen, clashing with an overwhelming fear of reaching out. He adjusted his heavy headphones, pulling the soft cushions tighter against his ears to drown out the silence of his own thoughts. He hit play on a random ambient track, letting the low, rhythmic thrumming wrap around his mind like a blanket, completely unaware that in just 24 hours, the terrifying sound of reality would shatter his quiet world forever. That comforting blanket of ambient noise worked its magic for hours, keeping the overwhelming emptiness of the night at bay until the digital clock on the studio wall clicked over to exactly 11:11 p.m. Suddenly, the soothing track cut out completely, replaced by a harsh, unexpected vibration that sent a violent tremor straight through the metal frame of the mixing console. Ethan jumped, his hand instinctively flying to his chest as his phone screen flared to life, casting an eerie, blinding white light across his tired face. The screen didn't display a name, nor did it show a familiar area code. It simply flashed two chilling words in a stark, bold font: restricted number. He hesitated, his finger hovering just millimeters above the smooth glass, torn between a sudden, inexplicable dread and the desperate curiosity that always plagued his lonely nights. In the quiet music industry, a late-night call usually meant a panicked producer or a corrupted audio file, but something about this specific vibration felt intensely heavy, almost deliberate. Before his frozen brain could command his finger to swipe right and answer, the screen abruptly went dark, and the frantic vibrating stopped just as quickly as it had started. The silence that followed was heavier than before, suffocating the small room, until a small, persistent notification icon popped up at the top of the display. A single new voicemail had been deposited into his inbox without his phone even ringing a full cycle. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird,
as he slowly lifted the device, his thumb trembling slightly as he unlocked the screen and stared at the digital envelope, wondering who could possibly be trying to reach him in the dead of the night. Staring at that digital envelope felt like looking down a dark, bottomless hallway, but his trembling thumb finally pressed the play icon, desperate to shatter the agonizing anticipation. At first, there was nothing but a thick wall of white noise, a crackling wave of heavy static that sounded like an old radio searching for a lost signal in a violent storm. Then, beneath the electrical interference, a soft, heartbreaking sound broke through, the distinct, muffled sobbing of a woman whose grief felt so raw it made Ethan's own breathing catch in his throat. His blood ran cold as the static cleared for a brief, terrifying second, revealing a deep, solemn voice reading from a script, speaking words that made the entire room tilt on its axis. "We gather here today to remember Ethan Vance, a soul who walked among us like a shadow." Ethan gasped, dropping the phone onto his lap, as if the plastic casing had suddenly turned to burning coal, his mind rejecting the impossible sentence he had just heard. It wasn't just the mention of his name that paralyzed him. It was the fragile, weeping voice that spoke next, a voice he would recognize anywhere in the world. Clara Montgomery, his childhood best friend, whispering through tears. "He was always so quiet. We didn't see the signs." Trembling violently, he forced himself to pick up the device again, his eyes widening in pure horror as he looked at the details of the audio file. The timestamps on his phone were clear, unwavering, and completely illogical. The voicemail was registered as an incoming file, but the official creation date and time were explicitly marked for tomorrow afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock. The impossible date stamped on that audio file kept him awake for the rest of the night, turning his bedroom into a cage of restless pacing and frantic logical rationalizations. By the time the weak gray dawn finally broke over the Seattle skyline, marking the official arrival of the day of his funeral, Ethan had almost convinced himself that the message was nothing more than an incredibly cruel, highly sophisticated digital prank. Yet the moment he stepped outside his apartment building into the chilly morning air, an unsettling shift in the atmosphere made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The barista at his usual coffee shop didn't offer her cheerful greeting. Instead, she stared right through him with a hollow, somber expression, handing over his cup without uttering a single word. Walking down the crowded sidewalk, he noticed people veering slightly out of their paths to avoid him, as if their subconscious minds recognized a presence that didn't belong in their living world. Even more disturbing was the glossy black sedan parked directly across the street from his building, its tinted windows completely concealing the driver, its engine idling with a low, menacing purr that seemed to follow his exact movements. Every instinct screamed at him to run back upstairs and lock the door, but the terrifying confirmation of the voicemail's reality forced him to move forward instead. He needed answers, and there was only one person in the entire city who could give him a reality check before the clock struck 3. Finding that reality check meant rushing straight to the local newspaper archive office, where Clara spent her mornings buried under stacks of research and half-written articles. He burst through the glass doors, looking wild-eyed and pale, catching her completely off guard as she adjusted her glasses and looked up from her glowing laptop screen. "Ethan, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice laced with genuine concern as she stood up, immediately noticing the tense, erratic way he was breathing. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He grabbed his phone, opened the mysterious audio app, and thrust the device toward her face, demanding that she listen to the message. Clara frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion as she took the phone, pressed her ear against the speaker, and listened intently for what felt like an eternity, while Ethan watched her every micro-expression. To his absolute horror, her face remained completely blank, showing no signs of the emotional devastation he had expected her to feel upon hearing her own grieving voice. "Ethan, there's nothing here," she said softly, handing the device back with a sympathetic smile that made his stomach drop into a frozen abyss. It's just 5 seconds of completely empty air and a tiny bit of clicking static. Are you sure your audio software isn't just glitching out from overwork? He took the phone back, pressing it to his own ear in a panic, and the vivid, tearful funeral service played perfectly for him, proving that this nightmare was tuned exclusively to his frequency. Realizing that she was entirely deaf to the haunting recording sent a wave of isolation through him that was far more terrifying than the voicemail itself.
He backed away from her desk, stammering a clumsy apology about exhaustion before fleeing the office, the heavy weight of the impending 3 o'clock deadline pressing down on his chest like a physical weight. He sprinted back to his apartment, locking the deadbolt and drawing the thick curtains to block out the sight of the mysterious black sedan that was still idling patiently at the curb. The minutes bled away with agonizing speed, each tick of his wall clock sounding like a hammer striking an anvil, echoing the rapid, terrified rhythm of his racing pulse. At exactly 2:45, a sudden, thunderous knocking rattled his front door, causing him to leap backward, his eyes fixed on the vibrating wood as if a monster was about to break through. He approached the pee-hole with trembling knees, bracing himself for the worst, only to see the familiar, stressed face of his estranged older brother, Julian, standing in the hallway. Ethan threw the door open, but before he could speak, Julian stepped inside, his face pale and his voice shaking with an urgency that matched the terrifying atmosphere of the day. "Ethan, thank goodness you're here," Julian breathed, gripping his brother's shoulders with white knuckles. "We have a massive crisis. Uncle Harrison just called from the family estate, and everything is completely falling apart right now." Julian's sudden mention of the family estate acted like a key turning in a lock, instantly connecting the frantic reality in his living room to the heavy atmosphere of the voicemail. As his brother explained the chaotic situation, Ethan realized with a sickening jolt that this nightmare wasn't about a physical tragedy or an ending of life. It was a cosmic reflection of his own emotional disappearance. Julian revealed that due to a massive clerical error and a severe identity mix-up at the regional courthouse regarding the family's old business assets, Ethan had been mistakenly listed as legally deceased in the state registry. If he chose to do what he always did, to hide away, ignore the phone calls, and let the administrative chaos resolve itself without his input, the system would finalize the paperwork, effectively erasing his social and legal existence by the end of the business day. The background noises Julian described, including the gathering of anxious family lawyers at a local hall, perfectly matched the muffled echoes and specific ambient sounds buried beneath the static of the recording. He wasn't being warned about a literal grave. He was being shown the permanent consequence of his lifelong habit of choosing invisibility over confrontation. The universe was presenting him with a literal manifestation of his internal state, forcing him to choose between fighting for his place in the world or fading away into a permanent, untraceable shadow. That terrifying realization turned his apartment into a battlefield where his cold, analytical logic fought fiercely against the desperate cries of his awakening heart. Julian was frantically pacing the hardwood floor, muttering about legal documents, power of attorney, and the immediate need to call a corporate lawyer to sort out the administrative mess before the offices closed. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone buzzed gently in his pocket, a soft reminder that the mysterious timeline was moving forward regardless of their worldly anxieties. He pulled the device out, staring at the screen as his logical mind screamed at him to follow Julian's advice, to treat this purely as a technical glitch and a legal hurdle that required paperwork and signatures. But his heart, long buried under layers of apathy and emotional dust, felt a profound, burning sensation that told him this was a spiritual wake-up call he couldn't afford to ignore. He looked at Julian, seeing the genuine panic in his brother's eyes, and realized that for the past 5 years, they hadn't spoken a single word of truth to each other, preferring the safe silence of estrangement. If he allowed logic to dictate his actions today, he would fix the legal error, but leave the emotional fracture completely unhealed, effectively remaining a dead man walking in the eyes of the people who should matter most. While he stood frozen in the middle of that intense internal struggle, a sharp, distinctive chime echoed from his phone, signaling the arrival of a second voicemail from the exact same restricted number. Julian stopped pacing, his eyes darting to the device in Ethan's hand, sensing the sudden, palpable shift in the room's energy as Ethan raised the screen to his eyes.
With a numb finger, he tapped the new notification, and this time he didn't even bother putting the phone to his ear. He simply let the audio play, knowing instinctively that the rules of this phenomenon had changed. The speaker didn't emit the sound of a weeping Clara or a solemn minister. Instead, a voice that was eerily identical to his own, but filled with a profound, crushing regret, echoed through the quiet room. "Don't walk away from the table tonight, Ethan," his future self pleaded, through a layer of crisp, clear audio that lacked any of the previous static. "If you leave that room because you're afraid to speak, you will cross a line, and you can never come back to the people who love you." Julian froze, his eyes widening as he recognized his brother's unmistakable cadence coming from the speaker, the gravity of the words hanging in the air like a thick fog. The message was a direct lifeline thrown across time, an explicit command from a version of himself that had made the wrong choice and was now suffering the eternal consequence of silence. The haunting echo of that second message completely shattered the remaining walls of denial between the two brothers, forcing them into a vehicle to face the epicenter of the crisis. As Julian drove through the heavy Seattle downpour toward the community hall where the family meeting was taking place, the tension inside the car became as suffocating as the storm outside. With every windshield wiper stroke, long-buried secrets about why Julian had abruptly left the family years ago began to spill out into the open, filling the cramped space with raw emotion. Julian confessed that his departure wasn't out of anger or ambition, but out of a paralyzing fear that he could never live up to the impossible expectations placed upon them both. Ethan listened in stunned silence, realizing for the first time that his own feelings of profound invisibility were mirrored by his brother's deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. The emotional distance that had defined their adult lives wasn't a natural fading of affection. It was a deliberate wall they had both built to protect themselves from the pain of vulnerability. By the time the car finally pulled up to the curb of the old gray stone community building, Ethan understood that the true funeral wasn't happening in a cemetery. It was the slow, agonizing death of their family bond that they had been attending every single day. Stepping inside the old community hall felt exactly like walking straight into the heart of the terrifying voicemail he had listened to just hours before. The large room was dim, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights that cast long, somber shadows across the polished wooden floor, where several extended family members and legal advisors were huddled in hushed conversations. The collective murmur of their voices created a low, vibrating hum that perfectly matched the audio frequency Ethan had memorized, making his skin prickle with an intense sense of déjà vu. As he and Julian approached the long center table, the talking suddenly ceased, and every head turned toward them with a mixture of shock, frustration, and cold judgment. Uncle Harrison stood up, his face etched with severe lines, as he immediately began waving a stack of legal documents, demanding to know why Ethan had been so unreachable during such a critical financial crisis. The air became thick with accusations, old grievances about trust, responsibility, and the perceived laziness of Ethan's isolation being thrown across the table like physical projectiles. Instead of retreating into his usual shell of defensive silence, Ethan felt a sudden, fierce spark of anger ignite deep within his chest, a powerful refusal to let these people define his existence any longer. That inner spark instantly erupted into a blazing fire, shattering the polite, suffocating decorum of the family meeting before anyone could utter another word of corporate jargon. Ethan slammed both hands flat against the wooden table, the loud sound echoing through the hall like a clap of thunder, successfully silencing Uncle Harrison and shocking Julian into absolute stillness. "Stop talking about the assets and the paperwork," Ethan cried out, his voice cracking with the immense weight of 5 years of unexpressed pain. tears finally welling up in his eyes as he looked at his gathered relatives.
You are all sitting here talking about my legal death as if it's an inconvenience, completely blind to the fact that you haven't looked me in the eye or asked how I was doing in half a decade. He turned his tear-streaked face toward Julian, confronting his brother about the agony of being left behind to carry the emotional debris of their fractured childhood alone. Every hidden emotion, every night spent in the lonely silence of the audio studio, and every ounce of resentment he had nurtured against the world came rushing out in a highly dramatic torrent of words. The room became completely motionless, the family members staring at him not with anger, but with a profound, sudden realization of the immense damage their collective neglect had caused to this fragile young man. The heavy silence that followed his emotional outburst felt like a physical crossroads, a frozen moment in time where the universe stood still, waiting for his next move.
The old grandfather clock in the corner of the hall began its deep, resonant chiming, signaling that it was exactly 11:11 p.m., the precise moment of reckoning predicted by the mysterious voicemails. Ethan looked down at his phone, which was vibrating silently in his palm, presenting him with a final, definitive choice that would alter the trajectory of his existence forever. He could turn around right now, walk out the heavy wooden doors into the rainy night, let the legal error stand, and completely disappear to start a new, isolated life under a different name, where no one could ever hurt him again. Or he could stay in this room, embrace the terrifying vulnerability of his raw emotions, and do the hard work of rebuilding the fractured relationships laid out before him. His boots scraped against the floor as he took a half-step back toward the exit, his old fear pulling him toward the familiar safety of the dark, while his soul screamed at him to remember the desperate warning of his future self. The heavy door loomed ahead like a portal to an empty void, and the temptation to simply fade away was almost too powerful to resist. Before his retreating feet could take another step toward that empty void, the heavy doors of the community hall swung open, and Clara burst into the room, her hair soaked from the storm, and her eyes blazing with absolute determination. She had spent the last several hours researching the restricted number, and a sudden, terrifying intuition had led her straight to this location just in time to witness his impending departure. She marched past the stunned family members, stopping directly in front of Ethan, blocking his path to the exit with her own fragile but unyielding frame.
"I don't care about the legal paperwork or the family drama, Ethan Vance," she said, her voice shaking with an intense emotion that completely shattered the lingering illusion of the voicemail. "But I care about you, and I am not going to let you walk out that door and pretend that you don't matter to this world anymore." She reached out, grabbing his trembling hands and holding them tightly, forcing him to look into her eyes where there was no judgment, only a deep, unconditional love and acceptance. Her words acted like an anchor, pulling him back from the edge of the emotional abyss and giving him the strength to make the ultimate decision to stay, fight, and finally let the people who loved him see his true self. When the morning light finally broke over the city the next day, it didn't bring the heavy, suffocating fog that had plagued Ethan's mind for as long as he could remember.
He woke up on his own couch, the soft, warm sunlight filtering through the open curtains and casting gentle, amber patterns across the room, instead of the cold neon blue of his studio monitors. He sat up slowly, realizing with a sudden, profound sense of relief that the phantom weight on his chest had completely vanished, leaving behind a peaceful emptiness that felt clean rather than hollow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers moving deliberately as he opened the audio inbox to check the mysterious messages that had started this entire ordeal. To his amazement, the files from the restricted number were completely gone. There were no dates from the future, no recordings of weeping friends, and no static-filled warnings from his own voice. The digital timeline had corrected itself the exact moment he chose vulnerability over isolation, leaving his phone as normal and ordinary as any other device in the city.
The black sedan was no longer parked at the curb outside, and the bustling sounds of the street below sounded bright, real, and incredibly inviting. The disappearance of the supernatural warnings didn't mean his problems vanished instantly, but it gave him the courage to begin the slow, deliberate work of fixing his real-world connections. Later that afternoon, Julian arrived at the apartment, not with a handful of panicked legal documents, but with a simple bag of groceries and an awkward, genuine smile that Ethan hadn't seen in years. They sat together at the small kitchen table, the very place where they used to share childhood meals, and began to talk about their past without the armor of anger or the shield of evasion. There were no instant miracles or grand speeches. Instead, there were long pauses, quiet apologies, and the painful but necessary admission of how much they had missed each other during their years of silence. Ethan explained his deep-seated feelings of loneliness, and Julian listened intently, offering his own perspective on the pressures that had driven him away from the family home. With every shared memory and honest confession, the heavy stone wall between them began to crumble, chip by chip, replacing the old static of estrangement with the warm, comforting rhythm of a restored brotherly bond. With his family life finally finding its footing, Ethan felt a powerful desire to express his gratitude to the one person who had refused to let him fade into the background. He invited Clara to the audio studio during the quiet weekend hours, but instead of turning on the heavy mixing boards to edit other people's voices, he set up a single high-quality microphone in the center of the room. When she arrived, looking curious and amused, he handed her a pair of headphones and smiled, his eyes shining with a vibrant energy that she had never seen in him before.
"For years, I've used this equipment to drown out the world," he whispered softly, his hand resting gently on the console. "But today, I want to start recording the things that actually make life worth living." He hit the record button, and together they spent the afternoon capturing the beautiful, ordinary sounds of their shared reality. The bright sound of Clara's genuine laughter, the rhythmic patter of rain against the glass, and the soft, comforting murmur of their own honest conversation. This beautiful, happy ending wasn't the conclusion of his story, but the magnificent beginning of a new verse where he fully embraced the joy of being alive. In the months that followed that beautiful studio session, Ethan's entire perspective on his profession underwent a profound and inspiring transformation.
He no longer viewed his audio engineering work as a shield to hide behind, but as a powerful medium to amplify the stories of those who, like his old self, felt completely invisible to society. He began volunteering his weekends at a local community center downtown, setting up a mobile recording station to help elderly residents, struggling teenagers, and ordinary people record their personal histories and messages for their loved ones. Listening to their diverse experiences, their deep regrets, and their enduring hopes allowed him to reflect deeply on what it truly meant to be present and active in the lives of others. He realized that the profound emptiness he had felt for 24 years wasn't a permanent character flaw, but a symptom of a world that often forgot to listen to its own quietest voices. By providing a safe space for others to speak their truths, he was continuously healing his own past wounds, ensuring that his life remained vibrant, connected, and deeply rooted in the community around him. One rainy evening, while organizing his personal digital files in his apartment, Ethan stumbled upon an old folder labeled with his journal entries and audio notes from the previous year. He hesitated for a moment, his mouse hovering over the files, before opening the documents and reading through the frantic, terrified words he had written during the week of the mysterious voicemails. A gentle smile touched his lips as he looked back at that dark period of his life, realizing with absolute clarity that the terrifying funeral had never been a prediction of physical doom or a supernatural curse. It had been a magnificent, metaphorical mirror held up by the universe to show him the tragic consequence of his own emotional apathy and self-imposed isolation. The thick, white noise static that had filled those mysterious recordings wasn't a technical error.
It was the exact sound of a life spent in defensive silence, a warning of what happens when a person refuses to let others in. He closed the folder with a deep, content sigh, feeling an immense wave of gratitude for the terrifying phenomenon that had forced him to break his own silence and fight for the beautiful reality he now enjoyed every day. The turning of the seasons brought a beautiful, crisp autumn to Seattle, marking exactly 1 year since the mysterious phenomenon had shattered and rebuilt Ethan Vance's world. He sat in a bustling local cafe, his laptop open as he finalized a community audio project, completely at peace with the lively hum of clinking porcelain and warm laughter surrounding him. Suddenly, the digital clock on his screen shifted to exactly 11:11 p.m., and a familiar, deep vibration sent a sudden tremor through the wooden table.
Ethan's breath caught for a fraction of a second as his phone screen flared to life, displaying those two unforgettable words, restricted number. A hush seemed to fall over his mind, but this time there was no paralyzing dread, no cold sweat, and no urge to run away into the dark. He looked across the table at Clara, who gave him a reassuring, confident nod, and then down at his hand, which was perfectly steady as he swiped right to answer the call. He pressed the phone to his ear, listening intently as a soft breeze rustled the golden leaves outside the cafe window. There was no terrifying static, no weeping voices, and no solemn funeral scripts echoing from the speaker this time. Instead, the line was beautifully clear, filled only with the gentle, rhythmic sound of a steady heartbeat and a quiet breath that mirrored his own. It was the universe's final, silent confirmation that he was truly here, firmly anchored in the present, and deeply connected to the living world. The dramatic journey that had begun with a message of death had ultimately become a triumphant celebration of life, leaving behind a powerful moral lesson for anyone walking in the shadows. True existence is not measured by the number of breaths we take in isolation, but by the courage it takes to open our hearts, share our vulnerabilities, and let ourselves be seen by the people who love us. Ethan smiled into the receiver, whispering a soft "thank you" into the quiet line before hanging up, completely unafraid of whatever the future might hold.